Welcome back to Invasive Brews, everybody. I'm headed up to the Kansas City area. This time I'm going to help Kansas Wildlife and Parks in some crayfish surveys. This will give us an idea of what species are in some urban impoundments and lakes and ponds and urban areas. So I'm looking forward to that. So I hope you are too. So let's hit the road. There are around 400 species of crayfish in North America, and they are one of the most threatened groups of freshwater organisms. Mussels are the most threatened group. And a few of those crayfish have found themselves on the invasive species list and threatening our native ecosystems and other native species. Species like the rusty crayfish, marbled crayfish, and the red swamp crayfish. These species have been used in the aquarium trade, fish bait industry, and for food, but have now found themselves released into new waterways. Today we are simply surveying 3 urban water bodies in the Kansas City area to just see what species are present and hope they are native.
But we're starting kind of on some of these smaller water bodies in Johnson County. Just talking with other states and stuff, a lot of the crayfish problems they're finding are in urban areas. We also had a person up here, a year and a half ago, our game wardens caught wind of someone selling marbled crayfish, which are, I don't want to say new species, they're closely related to a species in Florida, but someone somewhere in the aquarium trade found this blue colored crayfish, and it happens to be asexually reproducing, just like genetic freak, right? And then it kind of exploded across the crayfish trade. So now, like normally with rusty crayfish or some of the others, you're worried about, oh, you have to stock a male and a female. These marbled are just one. And so we had a guy in an apartment up here that he was actually breeding them and selling them. So the game wardens came up and confiscated everything. But point being, we're already concerned about urban areas, and then we know we had a guy in town here breeding these asexually reproducing non-native crayfish. So that kind of doubly made us want to start up here. Basically, depending on the size of the lake, determines how many traps we set. We may not see a ton of crayfish. We haven't at a lot of the lakes, and that's pretty standard for what we know. We had a graduate project a couple years ago. There just isn't really good protocols for how to sample crayfish in lakes. Most crayfish work is on streams, and so he sampled, I don't know, a dozen lakes, 15 lakes across the state. Gave us, did a big power analysis of how many traps based on the size of the lake. You still don't see a lot. They're just not very abundant in most of our lakes. So, but you know, but the second lake he sampled, he found our first population of invasive rusty crayfish. So kind of made the point that we need to be out here looking for these things.
We're still figuring out best methods of retrieval for some of these. Try to get them out far enough so it's hard for the public just to kind of come grab them and tamper with them.
No fish.
What do you use for bait?
Just wet dog food.
No crayfish, so we set off to check another trap. 1 down, 14 to go at this site.
So that's another indirect benefit of this project is like we're interested in invasive crayfish, right? But like if we go to some of these lakes and it's like there just are no crayfish that are common in a lot of these waters. Like that's something for like our fisheries biologists to consider is like we know from some diet studies that we've done for largemouth bass, April through June, the most abundant prey item in their diet is crayfish. So if we have some of these lakes that are just like crayfish deficient, we don't currently stock native crayfish, but it might be something worth considering. But if it turns out that, you know, we've got lakes that are devoid or essentially devoid of crayfish, it's something to consider in the future. Sort of hole with a hook coming, like a telescoping deal. More green. More bait. Oh, that one's a hybrid.
Since the first site didn't produce any crayfish, the only data we had to record was the fish species we caught. So on to our next site. And to keep us from spreading other invasive species like algae, microbes, insects, and others, biologists need to sterilize their equipment between survey sites.
Yeah, that's on. I just usually spray it down between.
And we are at Site 2.
That's the thing, even if they didn't want dog food, there's fresh fish in there.
Yeah. I mean, but at McPherson we had those couple traps that we had not have like a bait or in one of them or something. We still caught some.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean there's some traps designed just to be habitat. It's just attractive. They want to be in a tight space like that. But yeah, there's been several times we've had baitless traps and they've caught crayfish just fine. Localized and really stream based, like we really have no understanding at all of what's in our impoundments. So it's going to be really interesting. I mean, obviously it's going to take us a few years. The agency manages about 400 water bodies, and you know, I don't know what we'll do with the bigger lakes, but since we figure these are the higher risk for people dumping stuff, you know, we'll start in these areas. But like even Johnson County, what are there? 25 or 30 water bodies on that list? Probably 3 times that in Wichita.
Oh yeah.
Like there's so much water in Wichita. Because if we were going to do that, based on that project that kid did, if we wanted to do like true early detection, catch the very first one, we'd have to do like 2,000 net night or trap nights at every lake, and it's like we can't do that, right? Like we'd sample like 2 water bodies. So what we're trying to do, the protocol we're using now is for detection of common species at a lake. So since we don't know when or if they're marbled or rusties or whatever, we're doing that common sort of effort because like, well, you know, we don't have data that says they weren't here last year, right? So for all we know, they could be here in abundance, and so that's the level at which we would detect them. Like yeah, early detection would be better, but since we have no data to this point, just knowing what's common in locations is a lot better than not having any idea at all.
Yeah.
At this point, most of what we would do would be education based, like getting some signs up, doing a news release, letting people know that, hey, at whatever lake, we've got these, we don't want them anywhere else. And then we can also add that water body to our invasive species designated waters list, which makes it so that you can't move essentially live things in water away from that water body. Man, what's with all the big ones on this side of the lake?
I don't know.
Like, how does he even... Like, he has to really want it.
Yeah.
It's a strikeout on all our traps again, but we were able to document a different invasive species, purple loosestrife in this area. So we pack up, sterilize, and head to Site 3. It's a strikeout as well, all 15 traps.
Nothing. God dang. Covered in some
The email that I should have been, we're going sampling.
Not catching?
Yep.
Sad. And that's okay too, because like there aren't crayfish. Like I'm sure there are some crayfish here. There, you know, if there's water, there's crayfish. But it also means it's a pretty low risk for someone spreading them to another lake too, right? Like if we can't catch crayfish, even if there were rusties or marbled, it's unlikely, less likely that other people would come out here, get a hold of a bunch and move them somewhere else. Like it would be great to know exactly every species in every lake, but it's a, you know, 15 traps versus 2,000 traps sort of question.
We may not have caught any crayfish in all 3 sites that we tested, but data is still data. We now know that, you know, invasive species aren't really prevalent in those areas, and we also know that native species aren't really prevalent in those 3 urban sites that we tested. So we were kind of disappointed with our data. It was a hot day. It was on record. It was the hottest one of the summer so far. So it made for a great afternoon to find some good food and have a good beer. Martin City Brewing is a great place just for that. With 6 locations, I found the closest one and had myself an amazing late lunch and a couple of beers to wash down the hot day. This isn't their main brewery location, but I was starving, hot, and needed a barley pop, and it was the closest. Next time you're in Kansas City, Lenexa, Overland Park, or Lee Summit, be sure to stop in and try a Hardway IPA or an Abbey Ale. Or if you're like me, my favorite was their Fireside Porter. Until next time, drink local and plant native.